over to our webinar guests for today. And I'm delighted to welcome Dave McKay and Brian Addison from SSEN. And they're going to take us through their work they've been doing on really around corporate transformation. And I'm not going to steal their thunder, but they are both, there was 2 awards that they won for the Asset Management Excellence Awards in 2023. So we're delighted that they could join us today. So I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ursula. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. Thanks, first of all, for joining the webinar today. It's a real pleasure to talk about our transformation. We'll give you a bit of an overview of where we come from, I guess warts and all, and then where we're heading to. So over the next kind of 25-30 minutes, we'll take you through that at the moment. So just quickly a bit of background. As Ursula said, my name is Dave McKay. I'm Director of Asset Management and Operations for SSEN Transmission, and we're the transmission network operator for the north of Scotland. In terms of my own background, originally I'm an electrical engineer. I've worked with the SSEN, with SSE Group for almost 30 years in different roles. I've been in distribution, I've worked in thermal power stations, and for the last 11, 12 years now almost, I've been working in transmission. I guess, Brian, you want to give a quick overview of yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Brian Addison, and I'm Head of Asset Management in Dave's Directorate. So obviously responsible for looking after the life cycle of our sort of £5 billion plus worth of assets. My background is very, very similar to Dave's. As an adult, I've only worked in the electricity transmission industry in the UK, 25 years with National Grid, and for the last 5.5 years, I've been part of Dave's team in SSEN Transmission.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So, as I said, SSEN Transmission, we are the transmission network operator for the north of Scotland. We cover an area of about 25% of the landmass of Great Britain. And we're currently going through a period of exceptional growth, and it's very much driven by the need to decarbonise the economy, so net zero for want of a better word. We're having to connect lots and lots of clean green energy to our network, which then flows from the north of Scotland towards the rest of the country. We've kind of grown in my time in transmission from having an asset value of around £1 billion, currently to almost £6 billion. And by the end of this decade into the next, they'll probably double again to somewhere over £10–12 billion. So it's a period of exceptional growth. And for that to be successful, for me, the key is our asset management capability. And that's what we'll take you through today. So, Ryan, the next slide.
Okay, so rather than put out a really boring agenda that you would normally see in a presentation, we've sort of like done this in the form of a timeline. And as you can see, it starts in 2018 and it goes forward in this case to 2026 because that's the sort of timeline we've sort of set ourselves. Now, each of these areas we're going to talk through today, we're going to talk about at the starting point, that understanding that need, identifying our drivers that we needed for change within the organisation that Dave's already alluded to. We'll then talk you through our own thinking about how we would go about doing that. Then, as you'll see, we're going to talk about then the period of the work we've actually done over the last few years and how that's changed the organisation and the way we work and the outcomes of that. And then we'll finish with a look towards the future. What I will say is, as you can see on this, it's not just SSEN Transmission that's been part of this journey. We have gone out to a number of specialist consultants from around the world to help us. People like UMS Group, who've now rebranded as Oros Consulting, who have been running the International Transmission Asset Management Study and the International Transmission Operations and Maintenance Studies that we subscribe to. We've worked with Arcadis, who helped us understand that need and give us that initial direction. We've worked with AMCL on a couple of occasions, one to sort of like try and embed the need for change at the highest levels of our organisation with our senior leaders. And again, very recently, as we start to look towards what's the next steps to our future. As you can see, we brought Fraser Nash Consultancy. They helped us through our transition to ISO 55001. And just to keep it there plain, we also had we joined the Institute of Asset Management as a corporate member a couple of years ago. So that's the story we're going to tell. So I'm going to pass over to Dave to take you back to the beginning of this journey.
Thanks, Brian. So, as I said earlier on, I've been in transmission now for over a decade, and when I first joined, I was doing things like major projects, and back in 2015, I was put into the role of Director of Operations. Fast forward to 2018, at that time, I was then asked to take over what was then a very small asset management function. I think there was 8 or 9 people in the team, so very small. And I'll be honest, at that time, I was a bit of an enthusiastic amateur when it came to asset management. I didn't know a huge amount about it. So I guess I'd start off by thinking about, well, what is it that we were trying to achieve? And it was clear that we had some very obvious drivers behind what we needed to do. And that starts off, first of all, with targets from both the UK and the Scottish Government. Both governments were aiming for different types of net zero legislation, slightly different timescales, 2050, 2045, and so on. And that's changed over the years as well, what we needed to do within that period. So there was clear guidance, clear drive from the UK and Scottish Government to connect more and more renewable energy to meet these targets. And to do that, it was clear that we had to connect lots and lots of generation. And you can see in the graph there, this is probably a slightly out of date graph now, but at the time, it was clear there were sort of 2 or 3 different scenarios on how much generation that we would connect. And that was, at the time, we were at 6 gigawatts, I think, back in 2018. And it was forecast we'd have to connect up to 32 gigawatts by 2031. And that's a huge growth, especially when you consider we've got a very small demand within our territory. We only service 2% of the UK population. So demand-wise, we've a very small amount of megawatts or gigawatts that we need. But actually, north of Scotland especially, is a real powerhouse for especially wind energy, both onshore and offshore. So it's clear we had to work out how were we going to do this. We had quite clear signals from the electricity system operator, the ESO, what was required. So again, we had to start thinking about how are we going to do that. And very quickly, we started putting together a plan for this and for our next price control. And that equated to something like 12 to 15 billion pounds of network development, which is just huge. As I say, I've been in the industry a long time. I'd never seen this sort of scale of investment ever within our industry. So clearly there was a lot to do, and I had to get my head around, well, how are we going to do this? And the first thing I thought about, well, this is all asset management. How do we do it? So we'll move on to the next slide now. So the first thing I did was I decided to look at how mature were we in terms of our asset management capabilities. And the first thing we did the self-assessment model from the IAM, and our score came out at just above 1, awareness. It was, to be honest, pretty poor. And I think we really had to sit up and take notice that actually we weren't very good at that time. We had a lot of the core areas in place, but it really wasn't joined up. We didn't really do it properly. So it made me think about what is it that we needed to do to really improve our asset management capabilities. To kind of confirm what that was, we actually joined, as Brian said, ITAMS, the International Transmission Asset Management Study run by the UMS group. And we'd known UMS already from our work in the other benchmarking thing we did. Again, Brian mentioned it, ITOMS, the International Transmission Operations and Maintenance Study. And it really helped us to understand where we were. We did the self-assessment, or rather we did the assessment through ITAMS, and that came back at a score of about 1.4. So it kind of reinforced the self-assessment, maybe slightly better at that time, but it was pretty clear that we were nowhere near good enough to be able to deliver on our long-term plans for this really massive growth of our business. We'll maybe move on a little bit now. So what we had to do there was work out what we were going to do. what was our long-term thought process there? So Brian, I'll take you through that now.
Yeah, so in terms of this came about, as Dave was saying, at the time we were starting as an organisation to look at our regulatory business plan for the period for 2021 to 2026. So we're still talking back in the late part of 2018, early 2019. And one of the areas we were looking to try and do was really to differentiate ourselves as an organisation, to sort of like aim bigger and better than perhaps we had done in the past. So when we started to look at, well, what do we do for asset management? You've seen, you know, what we sort of showed you from the ITAMs and our self-assessment is that we, as an asset management organisation, we weren't very mature. I mean, our assets, the lights were on most of the time, but we didn't have that sort of like, you know, forward-looking and that coordinated approach. So we did initially think, well, shall we put forward that our vision is to actually achieve ISO 55001 certification? It demonstrates competence, you know, and we sort of like thought, well, okay, is that enough? So we said, no, it's not. Let's go a wee bit mad, and let's say we'll aim for world-class performance. And so we said, right, well, okay, now we've done that, how do we make that settle? So we actually wrote it down. It's actually documented in our Rio T2 business plan, a network for net zero. It clearly states that our long-term goal is to demonstrate world-class asset management performance. So that's the vision. So then we had to think about, okay, how do we go about actually doing that? So in terms of our overall strategy for this, we sort of like, look, there's 2 or 3 things we need to do. The first thing was setting that realistic time scale. I mean, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. Clearly, we were not going to move from a relatively immature a score to something that, you know, a score that demonstrated the fact that we were actually quite high performers. We had, you know, the asset management principles were very much embedded within the business. So we gave ourselves a period of time to do this. And interestingly, we have an external stakeholder group who advised us on our T2 business plan. The asset management specialists within that felt that 2019 to 2026 was an appropriate timescale. There was an enthusiastic endorsement of our plan to take that time to turn ourselves around and to establish ourselves as a more mature organisation. So obviously the next thing you got to say is, well, we're not going to achieve all, you know, that's not all going to happen in 1 year. So we've said it's going to take a period of time. So we need to figure out what are our milestones going to be. So we obviously knew we had to get our business plan together. So that was, we knew we needed to make some improvements in order to, I suppose, adequately deliver a business plan that was going to, you know, deliver the things that Dave talked about, the investments that were needed within the 2021 to 26 period. So that was one key point. We knew we had to do something by then. Then we'd sort of set ourselves as a target to achieve 55001 certification. So that we set that again in 2021. And then we knew we would have our ITAMs, a regular review using the biannual ITAMs, and essentially to give ourselves a scorecard to see just how far have we come in that 2-year period. The final thing, and I sort of mentioned this on our agenda slide, was we actually needed to get sign-on from the senior leaders, Dave, and the other members of the executive committee to be signed on. So we actually brought in Asset Management Consulting Limited to actually do an executive briefing to explain the importance and the requirements of the transmission executive as a collective group to help deliver the asset management maturity that we were trying to achieve. So Dave sort of told you the driver. We've sort of like said, well, this is what was said we were thinking we were going to do between 2019 and 2026. So now we'll move on to talk about the things we've actually done. So there was some really good things came out of that first ITAM study. I mean, as you could see, we had a lot of room for improvement. It didn't matter what we did, it was probably going to make us a better asset management organisation. But we did focus on several key areas. One of them was to create a catchy acronym called the Transmission Asset Management Steering Group, chaired by Dave, with senior members from across the transmission business in SSEN transmission, who have a responsibility for owning and developing the asset management strategy, policy, strategic asset management plan, and that coordination piece across all the different group directorates. So that group's been on the go for a number of years now, and actually we're at this point in time actually looking at how we restructure it in light of where we are today to get us to where we want to be by 2026. The area we were told that we really needed to work on was what they call connecting the outside in. So essentially, how can we as a business demonstrate we're delivering the right value as an asset management organisation if we don't understand what our stakeholders actually value? So one of the big things we did was we actually created a whole new directorate, our customer and stakeholder directorate under Christiana Logan. And that directorate went from a standing start in early 2019 to where we are today. Through the AA1000 stakeholder engagement group, we are actually assessed as an organisation of having an advanced capability in stakeholder engagement. I think with a maturity score in the mid 80%. So again, from where we were to where we are today, a huge step forward. I said we were in the process of putting together a regulatory business plan for the RIIO-T2 period. And another area that was considered to be weak from our side was how we consider the different scenarios that that would cause us to make the right investments, that whole planning process as an asset management organisation. So again, we sat down as an organisation and we did something very unusual for us. We wrote it down again. So as well as our RIIO-T2 business plan, we published 2 other papers for that, and one of which looked at how we plan and deal with our load-related investments. So that's all the new customer connections, network development, and we also published a risk-based approach to asset management document, which outlined how we look after our existing assets. And the RIIO-T2 business plan submission was actually the first time Ofgem offered incentives and penalties for the quality of the business plan. And I mean, you've got to judge it. We received a reward of £21 million for the value proposition we put forward. So I have to say, I think we did okay. We certainly learned a few lessons and we've put that into practice for our business plan submission. The third out of the 4 major areas from that first ITAM study was around competence. The organisations that we saw as being the best performers within the ITAMS group all had very well developed competence frameworks and rolled out that whole development and training of asset management as a discipline within their organisation. So it's something that we in SSEN Transmission have also embraced. We, over the last 3 years, we've had over 120 people now from our organisation go through the Institute of Asset Management certificate training, and so far we've 12 people go through the IAM diploma. And as we speak, we're in the final stages of launching a group-wide foundation level training course that will be rolled out to every person within the SSEN transmission business from April this year. So that rollout will continue. So by this time next year, we hope to have given a level of education to every single person within the transmission business so that they understand their role within the business and how their role influences the other parts of the business as well. So the fourth part of this initial ITAM study that we needed to work on was very much around our whole data and analytics piece. And I'm going to hand over to Dave for that, because Dave was one of the architects of this in this period for our T2 submission. So back to you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So so I said earlier on, when I took over asset management, I was a bit of an enthusiastic amateur. I think that would also apply to digitalisation. However, I was given the honour, shall we say, of putting together our RIIO-T2 digital plan. And it was quite clear from the feedback we'd been given from ITAMS that we really needed to improve our data, our IT, and all our enabling technology. So there's a real focus in that, and I did get a bit of help, obviously, to do this. But pictorially, you can see there how our kind of IAM system and everything fits together there. You've got Maximo, we've got ArcGIS, we've got Autodesk Vault, our CBRM tool, which is our condition-based risk modeling tool. We've got BIM, etc. So everything is there, and our plan for Rio T2 was very much to develop this. At the time, we had lots and lots of data, lots of information, all either on spreadsheets or in different systems that didn't talk to each other. So very much it was, our plan was, it was called your laptop on a page, if you like. So basically, how do you get information on a single page in a single source? And you could actually see that in one place. So basically what we've got there is you will be able to access all our systems from a single tool, and they actually talk to each other. It's something we've never had before, and it's a real step forward. Now, over time, we've developed that capability. We've also employed now a Chief Information Officer. So I'm no longer the enthusiastic amateur that needs to run this. We now have a proper digital expert who runs this plan for us, along with a full team that we've developed over the last 3 or 4 years as well. So a real step forward. So the 4 areas that we got feedback on, we started to address, we started to put things in place to do that. But what's interesting here is that you can have all the plans in the world that you want, but actually, what do you need to do to actually show that you've developed, that you've actually delivered something? And I guess the first thing that we did was we went for ISO 55001 when we felt we were ready to go for that. And clearly we got that. We got some really good feedback from the auditors when they did that. Previously, our certification had been part of a wider SSE networks business, but we decided to go our own way. Were we good enough to get certified? And we were. As we said earlier on, ISO 55001 just shows that you're competent. It certainly doesn't show that you're world class. So going on from there, what were the key outcomes that we got from there? So first of all, in terms of incentives that we get from Ofgem, one of our key objectives for Rio T2 was to provide 100% reliability in terms of power supply to homes and businesses. Now, we've just achieved 3 full years of no energy loss against the incentive. I'll touch wood when I say this, but we're 3 months away from 4 years of that incentive as well. So that's a major step forward. In terms of doing that previously, if you go back to 2013 from the start of the previous price control, we achieved it twice in 8 years. This current price control, we're about to achieve it 3 times in a row, almost 4. So it's a real move forward and a real benefit, I think, for our stakeholders. Because it was interesting when we actually did our stakeholder engagement for our Rio T2 plan, the number one thing that our customers told us, the most important thing to them was a reliable supply of power. So we're trying to do that, and it's a key thing about taking your business objectives and turning that into asset management objectives. The second thing is about network availability. So we have sector leading network availability. If we're going to transport those gigawatts of clean green energy from the north of Scotland to England and Wales and the rest of the country, we need to have a network that's available for all the generators to actually be able to export. And we currently have the best in class availability, well over 97% as it stands, and consistently the best over the last few years. So again, good asset management gives you good results. I think in terms of benchmarking, we've been able to see a real development of our capabilities, of our maturity. So for the first time ever, this year, when we got our ITOMs and ITAMs benchmarking back, we hit top quartile, which is further ahead than we thought we would be when we set out our milestones. And also, I'll call it Brian here. Brian attended the ITAMs conference back in the middle of last year. I think it was May or June in Rome, I think, if I remember. Is that wrong, Brian? Maybe it wasn't Rome, I can't remember. It was Amsterdam. That's where it was. I knew it was somewhere like that. But anyway, Brian attended that, and again, we were voted as the most valuable contributor towards the ITAMs group. So again, a real recognition that we're doing the right things. And I guess probably the last thing I'll call it here is, and it's maybe a little bit selfish, a little bit big-headed perhaps, but we actually did win awards this year. First of all, in the UK chapter, we won an award for corporate transformation, the UK chapter awards, and then in December at the Excellence of the Asset Management Excellence Awards, the Global Excellence Awards, we also won the award for global transformation as well. So I think that kind of reinforces that not only are we seeing results within our own teams, that we're making good headway, make good steps to what we need to do, but also our peers recognise that we're taking the right steps as well. So I think I'm really, really pleased that that was recognised by not only by IAM, but also by others as well. Then maybe move on, Brian. So in terms of what I mentioned there, that we're ahead of target on our transformation. And what we've done is on the ITAMS benchmarking, when we got our results back earlier last year now, we'd hit a score of over 3.7. So getting towards that score of 4 where we want to be, or above 4 for everything. What we also did was we also took in AMCL. Brian mentioned them before. We asked them to come back in and to review our progress. So look at what ITAM's told us and tell us from your expert position, what else do we need to do to actually get to that kind of world-class position? And this kind of spider graph here, you can see the areas where we're progressing, and that yellow line clearly is the sort of area at least we want to get the yellow line or over the next number of months. So as you can see there, from 2018, that kind of red circle in the middle, relatively poor, out towards that blue line where we currently are, and hopefully by 2026 we'll be that yellow line or beyond from that. So it's a real benefit, I think, and I think we're really pleased that we're doing that. It's been a real hard bit of work to get there. We've got to get all our senior management aligned, or core staff aligned, or contractors aligned. So it's not just about you say something and it happens. It's a lot of work to be able to do that. But we're not finished yet, I guess. But I suppose, Brian, do you think we're finished? Have we got more to do?
I'm glad you asked me that, Dave. No, because we do have another slide left, and I'd be really disappointed if I didn't get to present it. So we engagement with UMS Group, Oros Consulting now, and Asset Management Consulting Limited. What did that tell us this year? Well, it showed us, as you saw in the graph on the previous page, that there's still room for improvement in a number of areas. And funnily enough, that's exactly what AMCL told us. And they produced this, essentially this roadmap to where we need to get to achieve our objectives in the long term by 2026. Now, there's an awful lot on this. I'm not expecting you to read every single thing. What's important is you can see there's a lot of different areas. But what's particularly pleasing about this is that every single one of those areas that have a hatched outline, there's something that we'd already recognised as a business we needed to make an improvement in. So they're all either in flight or have recently been completed pieces of work, meaning that there are only 5 or 6 areas that are quite important areas, particularly in and around are still within our use of data and how we move away from using perhaps a calendar for maintenance activities to a bit more, I suppose, advanced and based upon actual need maintenance. So those things we've yet to build upon them. But as Dave's just already explained to you, to achieve that, you've got to have the work we're doing in our digital strategy needs to be completed. So we recognise we have to finish certain pieces of work before we can start other pieces of work. So we know that we now have a forward-looking work scope between now and 2026. So we do believe that we are in a position perhaps where maybe by 2026, this presentation that we're giving to you today, perhaps we may come back in 2026, 2027, and actually show you how we've achieved all of those things that we're setting out to do. So that is essentially the end of our presentation. We are 31 minutes in, so we've not run over too much, Ursula. So I will say thank you, everybody, and hopefully there are some questions, and I'm going to stop sharing so that I can actually see the questions as they come in as well.
So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Dave. That's absolutely brilliant, just taking us through what you've done. I hope we haven't lost Brian. We look like we've lost Brian. I'm hoping he'll reappear. Otherwise,
I'm still here. I'm still here, Ursula.
That's good. I was worried you'd disappeared there, Brian. Right, we do have questions. So please do submit your questions into the questions tab if you'd like to ask either Dave or Brian or both of them a question. We do have some questions that have been submitted whilst you've been presenting. So I'll manage those questions now, if that's okay. So the first question we have in is from Aurelian Lair, look, he asked the question: in the rollout of a group-wide education on asset management, will you tailor the training material to the various positions and challenges that staff face in their day-to-day activities? And if so, how do you proceed to prepare to tailor the material? So I think they're particularly picking up on some of the comments you were making about the Foundation Award, I think.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's a great question, and exactly that was exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted this to mean something to everybody in SSEN transmission, so I didn't want what I would call a typical generic presentation. So working with AMCL, who have been developing this for us, we've actually made it very, very SSEN transmission specific. Now, I recognise that means if we as an organisation make changes, as we're almost certainly going to do over the coming years, as we evolve, we will have to evolve that training to cope with that. But we felt it was worth the investment to get exactly that. People can see how they fit in, rather, from their actual roles that they do, and how that interfaces with other roles.
And I think it's actually really important that people see how they fit into the wider structure of what they do. One of my famous kind of anecdotes, or favourite anecdotes rather, is that when we first did our ISO accreditation or certification rather, that the auditor went out to one of our substation sites and talked to the teams that were actually building infrastructure, and they asked them, how do you guys fit into asset management? And the answer was, asset management, we just build things, mate. They didn't really understand that was part of the whole life cycle of what we did. So it's really important that we do make people understand that asset management is what everybody does. We're all asset managers.
Thank you. So Aurelian's asked another question, which is, how has asset management helped to increase network availability? So I think this was particularly picking up, Brian, on the point you were making, or you were both making, about the 97% level you've reached with your network availability. And I think it's really getting at that. How has asset management helped achieve that?
That sounds like an operations side of things, Dave, perhaps.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah, that's okay. I'll take that one as well. So yeah, well, so I guess it's what we've done is we thought very hard about how we manage our network. It's not just about going out and every 4 years you're going to inspect something or maintain something. It's all about thinking about risk and criticality of your network, what things do. There's some simple things we've done, for example, that we recognise that we need to do a lot more vegetation management, for example. We've gone from a network that had about 30% resilience to about 90% resilience from trees over the last few years. We thought about the type of plant that we install in the network as well. Brian mentioned earlier on about a Rio T2 business plan. So Brian actually wrote the document about our intervention strategies as well, a risk-based approach to asset management. I think, Brian, was that the title that you said? Mm-hmm. So it talked about how we actually looked at our assets and when was the right time to actually intervene and to invest in them. So we've got our CBRM tool as well, condition-based risk modelling tool, which is very much based on risk and criticality as well, probability of failure and so on. So I think we've really changed the way that we look at our network from a more strategic asset management point of view, rather than just there's some assets, we need to go maintain them, and when they break, we'll fix them. Brian, you maybe got some thoughts.
Well, I think also that, again, through the stakeholder engagement that we've been doing, Dave, is that understanding that what people value, particularly all those wind farm connections and other generator connections on our network, is the fact that even though they may not have a fully compliant to the UK SQSS, so they've got they've got a single circuit connecting them, they're looking for that world-class connectivity. They want to be generating all the time. So actually being able to communicate more effectively with those people, so that our maintenance requirements are in tune with their maintenance requirements. So you're not switching them off any more than you have to. Things like that, I think that there's been opportunities in those areas, particularly with our biggest customer, which is another group company.
Yeah, and I think probably the other thing I didn't mention as well is probably the real increase in remote monitoring in our system as well. we've really thought about the data that we need to run the network. So I think having more data and having more analysis of that data has really helped us to understand what's out there and what needs to be done.
Thank you. This picks up on something that you mentioned before, Dave, about capital projects, but I'll just read the question because it's quite a reasonably long question, but it's around that relationship between asset management and the capital project. So is your asset management system embedded at the beginning of all the projects to ensure they are developed, built and completed in line with operational asset management? In other words, is the asset management element an important criteria in the large capital projects governance framework?
So the answer is yes. Now, is it 100% successful? No. It's still, I think, a work in progress. But it's night and day compared to maybe 10 years ago. I'll go back to when I first, I did capital projects for several years. I did hundreds of millions of pounds of investment, and I'll be honest, asset management wasn't really the first thing in my mind. But when we actually set out the business case now for any project, we have, first of all, a needs case that's sorted out. We have something called our system development board. Both Brian and I actually sit in that, and I actually chair the SDB, and they've actually got to justify the need for something. So we make sure right at the very start that we think about asset management, because we're the people that actually have to sign off any capital project that gets delivered by SSEN Transmission. If they can't prove to us there's a need from our business drivers and so on, then actually that project won't go ahead. Our operational teams, our asset management teams, our specs and standards teams, they're all involved at each of the gates that we have. So we've got a gate system where you progress to each gate and you do a review, you move to each gate, you do a review and so on before it goes into construction. So in theory, I'll say in theory for a start, all that absolutely is integrated now into our decision-making tree. Is it 100% foolproof? No. I don't, Brian, you maybe got some thoughts too. But...
Well, I do. One of the things as an organisation we're in the process of rolling it out now is that we've introduced the concept, and don't laugh, Ursula, of whole life cost. So investments being made on a whole life cost basis. Now that doesn't mean that we will make the optimum decision every time, and that optimum decision means what Dave and I want. Clearly, as asset management and operations, but it means we're making the optimum decision potentially for the business at that. So if we're not making that optimum lifetime decision, at the very least we can explain why and the other factors that have caused us to go away from that optimum. So this is it's a big change for us. It will be in every major investment proposal coming forward, and literally we're in the process of getting the signed off and the documents updated as we speak. So
yeah,
that's
I was going to say just not a whole life cycle cost there. We've had a whole change team project on the way, which you've kind of headed up, to be honest, for the last year on that as well. So it's been something that's been absolutely driven, so we actually can tell our project teams that it's not about the 2 years that you build something, it's about the 40, 50, 60, 70 years you've got to think about, not that short time scale.
Thank you. So Christopher Harper has asked a question about what is involved in the process to be able to come to a decision on maturity scores against he's written 29, but I think he means the 39 subject areas. So that's the maturity assessment that I think you've been engaged with AMCL.
So the question was, how have we arrived at those scores?
What is involved in the process to be able to come to a decision on the maturity scores against the 39 subjects? Okay,
so I suppose it's like everything. The ITOMs, which a lot of transmission organisations have been doing for a number of years, and ITAMs are broadly trying to do this. They're doing similar sorts of things. You're collecting lots of data. So we asked, I think for ITAMs, we had 1,500 questions to answer. 1,500 separate pieces of information we had to provide around every area, essentially all of those 39 areas of asset management, about how we do this. What evidence do we have to demonstrate that we do what we say we do? And then I'll be honest, that's what we employ someone else to do is to do that analysis. So experts we work with experts in asset management competence and quality. They then analyse that and feed back to us. I mean, I'm not telling them, I don't go in and say, right, I'd like an A, please, this year, or actually no, a B- would be good because I want a B+ next year. That's not how we go about it. We provide, this is what we do today. This is how the questions are actually formulated like that, so that you give a clear piece of information with supporting evidence, and that evidence is then analysed. And so for me, Ursula, it goes into a nice, what I would call it goes into a number crunching machine, and out the end of that comes 100 and odd pages of analysis against each individual area that shows how I compare with other organisations. It shows how I compare with where we've been previously. I suppose, so I don't know if that answers the question. It says we don't do the number crunching, we just provide the data and then deal with the analytics after it.
And there's lots of follow-up too. If they're not clear, they'll come back and ask us lots of questions as well, and ask for supplementary evidence and so on. So yeah, we don't decide that. It's very much driven by, other than self-assessment, which is slightly different. But when you do ITAMs, it's very much a third party coming in to assess how good you are and what you're doing.
They're also, so I was going to say, they're also very, very good at saying, we don't believe you. If we think you're talking nonsense, we don't believe you, prove it. So there's no point. What's the point of subscribing to something like that, putting all the effort in, just to get a fabricated number? If you want to know how good you are, or where you've still got to improve, you've got to be honest and open, and that's what we've been with these things. So.
Thank you both. Just to remind the people on the webinar, the self-assessment methodology is available on the website. It's a member-only benefit for Institute of Asset Management members. So that's a starting point for some people, and then obviously many people go on to do different things, like you've demonstrated that you've done as well. So next one is all around organisational culture. So hi there, thanks for your presentation. You seem to have achieved a huge improvement in organisational culture in a short space of time. This is from James Fox. He works in the water industry, and he finds that he's constantly fighting a battle of influencing the organisation he works in to consider long-term sustainable value over short-term topical-driven decisions. How did you guys achieve this so quickly?
I don't know if it was quick, Dave.
So, well, it doesn't feel quick, to be honest. So I guess a couple of things. So we talked first of all about the sort of top-down approach. So one of the first things we did is we got the executive team to sign on to this. So I brought in AMCL, Asset Management Consultancy Limited, to do an exec briefing for a start. So the team, I mean, I'm obviously part of the exec team, but the other members, they had to understand what their obligations had to be in an asset-intensive industry. So they really needed to understand that. And one of the lines I always remember was very much about that not everyone can be winners, because there's always this kind of internal politicking, if you like, going on within an industry, and everybody wants the kind of win-win situation. Well, it's quite clear, and it's probably the thing I remember most of all, that not everybody can be winners. If something's going to cost too much money, then the finance guys have to decide are they going to put money into it or not. If something's going to last a bit less, but it's going to be a lot cheaper, well, the ops guys might have to decide, well, can I live with that? The asset management team might have to decide, I don't want to invest. There's all sorts of things you've got to bring together. So first of all, senior buy-in is really important. If you don't get senior buy-in, you go nowhere. So I think that was one of the best things that we did. We really laboured that. I think the next thing is that kind of bottom-up approach as well as top-down. So we spent a lot of time with our teams on the ground explaining where they fit into things. So as I said earlier on, we're not asset management, we just build things, mate. We need for people to understand where they actually fitted in. And we explained to them about what asset management did and why it benefited them. And then I think actually building a team that had credibility was quite important. So obviously I brought in Brian, which I don't know if that helped or not, Brian, but I brought in Brian anyway. Was one of the guys I brought in. I actually deliberately went out to get asset management expertise. I didn't have it. I think I'm a lot better than I was 5-7 years ago. I wouldn't say I'm the cleverest person in the room, and I don't need to be. but it's really important to get a team that's credible, that knows what they're talking about, that can actually demonstrate those benefits as well. So we talked there about availability, reliability. There's things we've done in terms of our SF6 gas leakage improvements. There's different ways we've operated the network. We've made money on different incentives. If you can demonstrate that by doing something there's a return or a benefit or it helps people, I think people are more willing to sign on. But it's not easy. Genuinely, it hasn't been easy. And even recently we had a session with our exec team, and again we were asked the question, is it just about managing assets? It's like, I thought I got this sorted. It's much bigger than that. So I think sometimes it's 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back, but it's a never-ending reinforcement of all the benefits and the changes that things need to happen. I don't know, Brian, as well, but
no, Dave, I think that's exactly what you said there. Yeah.
We've got a question now, which it would be good to get both of your views on this, because you've both got effectively a different journey. But thinking about personal development, what do you think are the best ways for an individual to learn, develop and succeed under the various asset management topics?
God, you've just asked me what have I done for the last 30 odd years, Ursula, because that's essentially, I'm actually presenting that tomorrow if you want to join SSEN Transmission as a new leader, as that very same topic. And I think, interestingly, Dave and I have a similar path, I think, in terms of our career. We've done a wide range of different roles. So if you look at that, if you look at the IAM's 6-box or 10-box model, and you start to see how does that apply to your organisation in the different areas, I remember, in one of them, Ursula, you gave me one of my final opportunities to deal with stakeholders in dealing with Ofgem for the first time, other than at a distance, actually face to face. But so I think for me, it's all about, you look at what you want to do in your career, because that's what I've done. I've basically worked my way around the different areas of the 6 and 10 box models, and I've spent time in most of them. So my knowledge is more breadth than depth, perhaps, but I know enough about each of them to be competent. And in some areas, it's relatively deep, I like to think. But so I think that for me is it. It takes time, and you have to plan your career development around things like that. But education helps. I mean, the IAM certificate and diploma courses, I think I certainly enjoyed both of them immensely when I did them. And that they gave me a huge amount of benefit as well.
Yeah, I don't think you can get away from the fact you've got to kind of have a broad experience, and that doesn't just apply to asset management, that applies to anything. You need to kind of get experience. So I think there's always, to be competent in something, they always say there's 4 things: there's knowledge, ability, training and experience. Now, ability is kind of what you have, but that knowledge you can get in different ways. It can be through training, it can be through experience. You can spend time in different places, but I certainly recommend, as Brian said, the certificate or diploma course, the IAM's course. I think I was a bit cocky. I went straight to the diploma course, and it was quite hard going straight to that. I'll be honest. I'd certainly say maybe build up to it first. I did pass, to be fair. I think that spending time with different people with different knowledge, different experiences as well. There's no single right answer, I don't think, to that question, but it's all about just trying to get as broad a range of experience as possible. Some of that will be formal training, some of it will just be experience.
Thank you. Brian, one of you mentioned the documents that you produced for the price control, and we've got a question asking whether it's possible to get links to those. I think those documents are available, aren't they?
They are public. They are on our website. If you go in and look at our Rio T2 business plan set on the SSEN transmission website, you will find them both there.
Yeah. Not just to be clear, not all documents in there. I think the key ones are there clearly, but some of the ones that have got costs and various things, they may not be on the website. So some of it is confidential, but the bulk of them are available.
Yeah,
those two are. Yeah.
Then we got a question about learning from other sectors. So you've talked a lot about learning from within the sort of electricity sector, but just get your reflection here. We've got a question here about learning potentially from other sectors, and what you might be doing in that space?
Well, I think it's really important to just not be too inward gazing. I've spent time, for example, I went across to Tesla. I've spent time with, I even spent time with Waitrose, for example, just to kind of see how they did it, inventory management. I've spent time with lots of different companies, and equally, in terms of recruitment to the asset management team, we've got lots of people who have come in from not just the kind of energy sector. They're coming from water or gas or offshore or retail. So we've learned a lot from those people coming in as well. So I think absolutely you can, or you should, cast the net wider and not just look at your own sector. There's lots you can learn from other people. And actually, even doing the diploma course, for example, I spoke to lots of people there from different industries there as well. Rail, for example, I remember rail was there, gas, there was nuclear, and so on. So there's lots of people. There's people from facilities management and so on. So I learned a lot even just talking to those people by doing that. So yeah, I would say that casting the net as wide as possible really helps.
Yeah, I concur with that, Dave. Absolutely.
Then there's a question about you mentioned during your presentation. This comes from IPEC, and you mentioned 100 million TOTEX outperformance, and it said, what were some of the key initiatives that enabled this outperformance?
That's quite a lot actually. So I think there was a number of things, for example, about innovation that we did. So we looked to see how we could do jobs differently from how we originally costed them, or rather how we scoped them rather. So what could we do to still get the same output but do the job differently? As everybody will know, technology moves on over time, and what you do in 2018 might not be what you do 7 years later. So part of that, a lot of that came through innovation and actually doing things differently. We used different technology in the network, different ways to run the network harder. So dynamic line ratings are an example of doing something differently. For example, smart monitoring as well in different ways. I think, Brian, anything that springs to mind?
Well, I suppose, Dave, thinking of also other practical things like the approach we've taken, because it's TOTEX, the approach we've taken to vegetation management, because we've been obviously been talking about that very recently. We used to outsource all of that, and actually what we've taken now is bringing more and more of that work back in house, and it's saving us quite a significant sum of money. So it's not all about £100 million saved here, 100. It can be £500,000 saved here over the 5 years, and it's how they all add up. It's those hundreds of small improvements. For instance, every investment, every project that we are doing, every improvement project we do, we are tracking the value. We're first of all quantifying the value that project will deliver, to understand, right, okay, what benefits is that going to bring back to the business, whether it be savings in people, savings in costs, or whatever, across the board. And actually, we're now tracking those right through the life of that. Let's call it an investment in improvement. We track that as well.
Yeah, and I guess some of the data information we've got as well coming back from site, our digital transformations helped us to actually run the network differently as well. So we maybe don't, for example, maintain something, every 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. We've managed to change the frequency and so on. So there's been
we've changed the frequency of our maintenance. Yeah,
exactly. So there's a whole raft of different things that we've done.
Thank you. The next question is around your digital strategy. So could you talk a bit more about the biggest challenges to implement the digital strategy in asset management, and what are the factors which can enable to make the implementation smoother?
Wow. So I guess the digital strategy for a start, for us, I suppose it wasn't difficult to do something better, because we actually relied on lots of kind of old, bespoke, I suppose, SEC group systems, first of all, and with lots and lots of information on spreadsheets, as I said earlier on. So first of all, anything was kind of better, I think, than what we had before. So it wasn't difficult to make an improvement. But the kind of network on your phone, the network on your tablet as well, being able to access things through a central point was a big step change. You didn't have to go through 6 or 7 systems. You can go to one point, you get hyperlinked to somewhere else. It was so much, and it is so much easier to get data. Now, we're certainly not finished this, it's still an ongoing process. data, our data standards, for example. We've had to put in place real kind of controls over it. I mean, Brian, you're probably more appropriate to talk about the data side than me because you've been heavily involved in it, but that's been a real step change as well, because data is everything. If you don't have information, no matter what system you've got, if you don't have the right information, you don't really make a change, or you don't have the right information to actually run things differently. But maybe Brian, you might want to comment on that.
Well, I think also just an aside to what you've said, Dave. I think for me, one of the biggest benefits we've had is that normally within an organisation, people will accuse the IT tail of waggling the dog. Our digital or IT team, our Chief Information Officer, sits at the same table as Dave. He's part of transmission. And in every engagement that we have, he's very, very clear that first thing he needs to understand is, what does the business want to do? So I'm in the process of looking at we've showed you a picture of where we want to go to by 2026. We're now focusing on what's the next steps for 2031 and beyond. So I'm sitting down with colleagues in the digital team to say, this is what I want to do, so that they can start to think about the ways of how we use the systems we have and the capabilities those systems have, and how we might achieve my aims in the best possible way. So I think that is a massive step forward. We're not being told that you're having that and you'll make the best use of it. We're part of the decision making for this. In fact, our needs are at the forefront of that decision making.
And I think possibly one other point there as well is that within the SSE group, there are the kind of 7 businesses, and we've been federated in a lot of ways. So actually, rather than say you've got to have this core system that all 7 businesses run, there's been an acceptance that some businesses may need to do something different, and we've been given the power to go and do that. Now, we work together as a group where possible, but where there's requirements for an individual business, so rather than buy something like in the past, perhaps we bought a system that everybody would take, it wasn't really suitable for transmission. We've now been given the power that if it really doesn't work for us, we can go and do something different. And I think that's been a big step change as well.
Right, well, I'm going to call a halt to we have got a couple more questions we haven't got to, but we're just coming up to the top of the hour. We've already overrun by a quarter of an hour. So I do think we just have to stop at this point, although we could carry on for quite some time. I'd have loads of questions I could ask you. So, but I won't. So I wanted to say a massive thank you on behalf of everyone to Brian and for Dave for joining us today and sharing with us their journey. It's absolutely fascinating, and I, for one, will be very interested to see how things progress as you continue on your journey. And I'm sure all our attendees will as well. I want to thank all our attendees for joining. We had people from across the world, right from New Zealand right across into Canada and the US. So we had a really broad range of people right across the world join us. So I had a quick look down the attendees list. So so thank you everyone for joining. And as I said, this has been recorded, and so you will get the opportunity to watch it again if you want to catch up. We will pass the questions on to Dave and Brian as well, and we will try and see if we can get an answer to the couple of questions we didn't get asked. But also, I think it's worthwhile them seeing all the questions that we had in. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dave and Brian.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.